I love oysters. I love them raw on the half shell. I love them baked, boiled, grilled, or fried. Delicious, nutritious, and mood elevating, oysters are my go to appetizer. I'm fortunate enough to have a friend who is an oyster farmer. I get to enjoy a local selection from Hollywood Oyster Farm. I was inspired to meet with Tal Petty to understand how he built his oyster brand and what makes Hollywood Oyster Farm unique.
So we're lucky, our family is lucky enough to have a 300-acre farm about 90 minutes south of Washington, D.C. in Hollywood, Maryland, St. Mary's County. And on the weekends, I would come down, and to stay out of trouble, I started growing oysters in cages under our dock as a hobby on the weekend because I love oysters. And we've got a place on the water, why not grow your own? So these are oyster cages, and we've got a couple thousand of these in the water. And this is what we grow the oysters in. It's important to note that some people grow oysters on the bottom. We grow oysters in cages in what's called the water column, between the bottom and the top of the oyster. Okay? It's more a controlled environment. That's the farmed oyster. You can farm them on the bottom, but they're much more prone to predators there. So cages, what do? Basically, it's got a foot, keeps it a couple inches off the bottom, so there's water flush from the bottom. There's a bottom tray, and there's a top tray, and there's a top. And each of these holds, give or take, 1,000 oysters, 1,000 market-size oysters. Obviously, if you got a 2-inch oyster in there, it holds more, and if you got a bigger oyster in there, it holds less. But it's important when you look at the water to visualize long rows on lines of these oyster cages in the water. This is a picture of the lease off of our land here, and you can see our workboat. Her name's Victoria, and that's a crabber boom. We just, with a hydraulic pack, and we pull cages with that. And what they're doing is they're looking for a long line to start. They'll pull about 6 or 10 cages with that as soon as they find the start of the line. Many farms you have to actually motor for 5, 10, 20 minutes, even longer to get to the lease. Our lease, as you can see, is right here in a creek and on the Patuxent River. That's about a mile across out there. It's relatively shallow close in, and then there's deeper parts of the lease. So it works really well for us. In the summer, in the shallow parts, we can farm a lot of the small seed close in, and in the wintertime, we put them out for the lower tides. And the area where we're lucky is the efficiency of it. Because our lease is right here, our operations are right in the middle of it, and we have really minimal motorboating time bringing oysters to and from the lease to the operating center. We buy seed at 1 millimeter, and 1 million oysters at 1 millimeter is about a gallon. And the oysters come from a hatchery. They come from several hatcheries in Virginia, and that's a whole other area of expertise. But we buy oyster seed, and again, as opposed to spat on shell. Spat on shell goes on the bottom. And oyster seed is a contained, controlled environment in cages that we grow. And so on the dock here, we've got about 50 or 60 silos. And each of these silos start seed at 1 millimeter, and we grow them in here up to about 3/8 of an inch. And so each of these silos, you can see, we've got millions of seed right here growing on the dock until they're big enough to go into the water. So there's an oyster that you can see the growing edge on it, and that's about 3/8 of an inch, just about big enough to go out into the river. And that's got a nice cup developed on it already. That'll be a delicious sweet Jesus and Hollywood oyster.
Basically what we're doing to grow oysters, we're sorting and we're cleaning. Every stage of their life, there's a different size they're being sorted on. And sorting does a couple of things. One, it removes some of the fouling we saw with the squirts down there. We'll get that out. Also, they grow better if they're sorted and they're all kind of like size. These guys here, we'll put them back in a bag at probably around 1,000 to a bag. And as they grow, they're going to fill that bag up. So we'll bring them in again, sort them, pull the smaller ones out, trim the bags out, set them all up by size.
A couple of years ago, we put in a solar farm. I own the land farm with my family, my siblings and my mom. And they're very committed to keeping the farm itself undeveloped and also having a neutral footprint. And so we put in a 72 kilowatt solar farm a few years ago, And that farm, that powers the entire farm. And so we've got several houses pulling off of that, plus the entire oyster operation. All the pumps that run the nursery and all the equipment on the dock, as well as the entire packing plant, walk-in cooler, and office is all solar powered right here on the farm.
Okay.
And that's it in a nutshell. We just constantly sort and shake and manage our inventory. And when you have a farm like our size, inventory is the name of the game. You got to know which oysters went where and when.